The Nautilus Class Minelayer is an upcoming sub-capital ship in Star Citizen, packed with a selection of deployable munitions. The idea is that the Nautilus would fly to an area of space that you want to deny access to hostile forces, and unleash a payload that says, "No, this is our territory," which understandably has a lot of players interested. I'm Forrester, and welcome to the Drydock, a new series which will delve deeper into the ships of Star Citizen. This video will explore the background behind the Nautilus both in and out of game, then take a look at some of the attributes and statistics of the ship before considering how that might all translate into gameplay. There are timestamps in the video description, although if you're a fan of the Nautilus, you might prefer to watch this one all the way through. And whilst this channel usually focuses on what's currently in game, necessarily this video will navigate the treacherous space that is speculation territory. Whilst every effort has been made to approach this video accurately, sometimes information is sparse and much is subject to change as time goes along, so please treat the content with a pinch of salt and not as a definitive promise as to what will happen. All of that said, let's dive into the background of the Nautilus. The Nautilus was first announced back in 2019, including a mini-game on the RSI website for players to get their head around the mine warfare gameplay concept. Shortly afterwards, the Q&A was released, which answered some of the common questions from players following the announcement. There has been very little following the initial flurry of information, so it remains to be seen how long the ship will remain in development or when the Nautilus might reach player hands. In game lore, the Nautilus is a very old Aegis Dynamics design. Drawing on inspiration from sappers in the first Tavaran War, who used crudely designed mines to great effect, Aegis developed the Nautilus as a dedicated combat engineering vessel built around delivery of explosives with surgical precision, with the Nautilus making its debut in 2549, right on time for the Cold War with the Xi'an. That placed the Nautilus on the Peri line, making regular deployments to secure key strategic points and deter any aggressive actions. During this time, many improvements were made to the Nautilus, especially around the mine deployment mechanisms, with the most substantial upgrade arriving in 2601, replacing old conveyor belt and even older trolley systems with an overhead rail. In 2603, the Second Tavaran War gave the Nautilus some true combat credentials, proving the design and moreover introducing homing mines to the arsenal aboard. During the Battle of Centauri in 2610, often seen as the deciding battle of the war, the Nautilus played a key part, with the Blackheart Sapper Squadron isolating and damaging a key part of the Tavaran fleet, preventing them from linking up with the remainder of their forces. Most recently, the Nautilus has taken part in operations against the Vanduul, including decimating an entire Vanduul squadron attempting to withdraw from Oberon. The Nautilus also featured in the 2946 Militia Mobilization Initiative, offering civilians the chance to acquire the Silent Workhorse. On launch in 2019, the Nautilus was offered for sale for $725 or $675 of new money, and this price has persisted since. The Nautilus has only subsequently been offered for sale to coincide with specific events. The stated purpose for the Nautilus is as a minelayer, to deny an area of space to hostile forces. Additionally, the Nautilus doubles up as a minesweeper, but potentially only for mines dropped by the Nautilus combat platform. The design inspiration seems to be the various contemporary naval mine warfare ships. Based on current information, the Nautilus would have a total length of 125 meters, a total width or beam of around 72 meters, and a total height or depth of 21.6 meters. For context, that's very close in terms of height and width to a hammerhead currently in-game, but with a taller profile. The total mass of the Nautilus looks to be around 13,526 metric tons. By way of components, the Nautilus is expected to house a large radar as well as two medium-sized computers, Power is expected to be provided by 2 large power plants, with cooling provided by 2 large coolers. Defensively, the Nautilus would carry 3 large shield generators. The Nautilus specifications list 2 large fuel intakes, 2 large hydrogen fuel tanks, and 2 large quantum fuel tanks, and both the quantum drive and jump drive are set to be large size. In terms of propulsion, the technical overview lists 2 main thrusters, 2 retro thrusters, and 4 VTOL thrusters, with 12 fixed maneuvering thrusters located around the ship, providing rotation and translation support. The conventional armament aboard the Nautilus is mostly centered around turrets. At the front is a manned turret armed with 2 size 7 weapons, the same size that you might find on an Ares starfighter. On each side is a further manned turret, each armed with 2 size 3 weapons. On the underside is a manned turret with a missile rack armament. But naturally, the main feature of the Nautilus is the size 7 drone/mine system. This is equipped with a selection of 3 different types of munition initially: a homing mine, which floats around until something flies close by and then flies towards it and boom; a sentry mine, a little like a turret in space armed with 2 size 2 weapons; and a mine recovery drone for picking up mines dropped by a Nautilus. The firepower of the homing mine is said to be similar to that of a size 5 torpedo, like those dropped by a Gladiator. The total payload for the Nautilus is said to be 24 mines. The crew specifications for the Nautilus note a minimum crew of 4 to a maximum crew of 8, although this may be another one of those ships where the requirement is a little lower. For the most basic of operations, a Nautilus is likely to be deploying mines before combat begins, so potentially a single person could be both piloting the ship and then getting out of the chair to deploy the mines before heading back to the pilot chair. For actual combat operations, manning the gun turrets would take 3 people, plus a pilot, plus somebody to swap between mine operation or missile turret operation would make for a potential realistic crew of 5. Whilst the missile turrets and mine control room are on opposite ends of the ship, the central lift looks to connect them fairly closely. Depending on the nature of the engagement, there may also be merit in a 6th to operate engineering or repair multi-crew type functions. The Nautilus is not as large as some of the capital ships, and so the amenities are more befitting a ship at this size point. There's a habitation section with a mess hall, crew quarters, and a captain's quarters, as well as a docking collar. And there's a cargo bay with 64 SCU of storage, which the Q&A specifically notes is not capable of storing additional mines. So, the primary gameplay use cases are likely to be to deny an area of space to hostile forces, potentially with relatively low crew requirements. That makes the Nautilus potentially great for escorting a miner or salvager who is going to be in one place for a little while and could use that area denial style of protection. The payload, being similar in explosive power to a Gladiator torpedo, probably works fairly well against small to medium-sized raiders. There could potentially be a use case in area denial of some sort of spaceborne base in the future, although the Q&A specifically states that the mines don't work in atmosphere, so are limited to 3D space. And this is a key challenge for the Nautilus. The relatively small range of the turrets or mines, given the vastness of space, means that they could be quite avoidable. While Star Citizen does have a 2D plane around the gravity well of each star system, with planets largely sitting on that 2D plane, space itself is fully 3-dimensional, so in many cases an enemy would need to be lured into a minefield. Moreover, for moving engagements like protecting a cargo ship, the mines are likely to be not as viable a solution as some sort of mobile escort, which reduces their efficacy somewhat. The other potential use case is piracy, or, I'm sorry to say, even to the extreme of trolling other players. Given the relatively indiscriminate nature of the mines, or at least a very simple hostile or not mechanism, In many cases, the easy option would be to drop a minefield on a well-travelled route and let the mines wreak havoc on an unsuspecting ship. Now, the cargo bay on the Nautilus isn't huge, so it would be reliant on another cargo hauler to pick up larger bounties, but it's a potential use case. But the predictable travel routes of many pilots make landing in a minefield a possibility. From a peaceful perspective, there's a potential role in acting as a minesweeper, although it's not clear how effective the recovery drones would be at disarming mines left by another Nautilus. The Nautilus does carry reasonably heavy armament, with 2 size 7 cannons up front and some anti-fighter defensive turrets too, meaning potentially smaller scale combat duties could be another potential role for this ship. Alternatively, returning to the site of a minefield to clean up any damaged ships could be an option. The slightly weird and unusual style of combat of the Nautilus that it specialises in could mean that rather than being in and amongst the thick of the action, much of the combat in this ship is actually quite pedestrian, fighting before the fighting starts, which might be interesting for some, but not for others. Time will tell. Identifying a fleet role for the Nautilus is difficult, and that's largely because it seems that the Nautilus is more designed to be deployed before a major engagement rather than as an active part of one. And that preparatory nature of the ship leans more towards solo deployment rather than as part of an active fleet. In defensive mining or salvage operations, the ability to work with an industrial ship and give them an element of protection coverage seems the most compelling use case, able to deploy a protective screen of mines and turrets around a harvestable, and then collecting them to move on to the next location to deploy again. The potential to deploy these with just a skeleton crew could provide a relatively large amount of firepower with a relatively small group of players. But in a large-scale engagement, the Nautilus seems more like it would be a target to be shot at than something to do the shooting, and that's in part due to the large footprint of the Nautilus. Yes, the armament aboard is fairly heavy, equal to a single turret of the Perseus, but fired from a considerably larger target. Regardless, the Nautilus could be a very interesting ship when it finally hits the verse, with a style of gameplay that is much more unique than other offerings. But at the risk of going on for too long, we'll draw a line under the Nautilus here. As this is still a relatively new series for the channel, your thoughts on either the Drydock format or the Nautilus would be very welcome in the comment section. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, you might like to do that too, so you can get the heads up for new videos on the channel, as well as dropping an industrial-sized mine on the like button if you like heavily narrated slideshows talking about naval hardware. Otherwise, and as always, thank you for watching.